When I think about stress in general, whether you're a highly sensitive person or not, I see three main areas where stress seems to show up. The first is mental stress. Mental stress means that you're focused on something and you're getting challenged by the overwhelming experience of it. Maybe there's too much activity. Maybe there's too much problem solving. The mind is active trying to solve something, or it's staying engaged with something that is taking a lot of its attention and just keeps going and going. So, mental stress is something that we all face at work. If you're working for 7, 8 hours a day, by the end of the day, there's stress there. In addition, if there's deadlines, there's a kind of stress. And if you're trying to solve something that is difficult to solve, then this is the kind of mental stress that can be a challenge and is something that needs to be dealt with. In dealing with mental stress, the best antidote is rest. Meditation is a great form of rest. Sleep is a good form of rest. Basically, taking a break from that project, from that situation that is demanding so much mental energy is what's going to balance it. Sometimes this means saying no to something or prioritizing and saying, okay, we'll get to that later. Basically, doing one thing at a time can be very helpful when dealing with stress, mental stress, because that feeling of overwhelm comes a lot of times from trying to balance too many different things. Changing your focus to something else for a while, exercising for a while, loosening your attachment to the outcome of what it is that you're trying to do. Let's say you're trying to create something and it's challenging, you're running into problems, you're getting frustrated, and you don't feel like you're making progress to that goal. Well, stepping back a little bit and going, okay, how is it okay that I don't reach that goal? Or how is it okay that I don't reach that goal today? And just loosening the attachment, even though you're still moving towards something, creating something, if you're not holding it so tightly, that can definitely reduce mental stress. Also, redefining perfection. Perfectionism is something that highly sensitive people, myself included, tend to get caught into. And we can see how perfectly things could be. We can see the subtlety of how nicely a job we could do. But redefining it sometimes to match what is actually possible will reduce mental stress quite a lot. And then finally, working on any need for approval. If you are doing something with the hopes of getting approval, of proving yourself or being successful in a particular way, then this is going to add a lot more stress and it's going to make you push more than may actually be necessary. So all of these things are options that you can play with. Some of these are very simple, taking the time to rest, taking the time to meditate, taking the time to say no, changing to something else. And some of them are things that you can do, like with the work of Byron Katie, where you can question your attachment to a particular outcome or your need for approval. And so these are the kinds of things that we'll be going into in more detail in this podcast, but they are options for reducing mental stress. Now, I said there are three main types of stress. The second one is emotional stress. So you have mental stress, which is like getting frustrated because you're not achieving what you want to do or getting overwhelmed by having too many things to do and you just can't manage it. Emotional stress is when you think something is like worse than it is, like the outcome is starting to get very stressful on an emotional level. Now, mental stress can have an emotional component to it, but emotional stress especially comes up with the sense of, comes up in relationships. It comes up with that feeling of not being good enough, that desire for acceptance, and thinking that what is happening is really a terrible thing, like really like exaggerated, terrible thing. And this makes us feel like really powerless and really stressed. The feeling can be anger, it can be sadness, it can be fear, it can take on any number of different types of emotions. But the fact that emotion shows up tells you that this stress has an emotional component to it. And the purpose of that is to get your attention. So nothing wrong with emotion. It's the perfect alarm clock. We don't like it. So it gets our attention. And that tells us, okay, hey, what's going on? There must be something I need to look at here that would help me come back to balance again. This is especially important for highly sensitive people because we notice our emotions sooner than other people in many cases. And so we're living with that experience of a stressed emotion earlier. I'm a facilitator of the work of Byron Katie, and that process is amazing in the sense that it gets you to pay attention to the emotion first and then connect it back to a thought that you're thinking that's connected to that emotion. Emotions and thought go together. They're kind of really one thing. There's an emotional component of a thought, and then there's the thinking component of a thought. Or I should say, the emotional component of an experience, and then the thought component of that same experience. So the emotion gets our attention. The thought is what we put through the questioning process. And as we do that, the emotion tends to shift. So again, we'll get into a lot of this in this podcast. There's a lot of chances to do this practice. And my experience is emotions settle right down when you actually pay attention to them, when you actually listen to them, give them a chance to be heard, and treat them with respect. Like, okay, I see you're experiencing anger. What's going on? What are you angry about? And just that turning your attention to that emotion and saying, hey, what is going on, is going to make that emotion feel like it's finally able to be heard. And that settles things a lot. And then if you can go even further and say, let's go through the questioning process about what you're believing and actually let the emotion work its way through the stress, you may find that the emotion just completely disappears. And in my case, in many people's cases that I've worked with, the same situation may not be as stressful again. In fact, it may not be stressful at all. Okay, so we've talked about mental stress. We've talked about emotional stress. The last one I want to mention is physical stress. This is important for everyone, but I think it's especially important for highly sensitive people. We're sensitive not just on a mental level, not just on an emotional level, but on a physical level as well. People who are highly sensitive are more sensitive to medication. They need a lower dose of medication to have the same effect. People who are highly sensitive are much more sensitive to if there's not enough sleep, or if the body has just gotten tired. You can get hangry. If you're hungry, you can get grumpy when the body is not as balanced as it could be. Now, you can also get caught emotionally and mentally about this, thinking that you want to always have the perfect body and have not perfect body, but perfect resilience and strength of your physical system. And this can stop you from actually engaging in life. And that's not the point here. The point is to look for the balance. How can I find a balanced lifestyle? How can I set up my life so that there's enough sleep that I'm rested on a regular basis? How can I eat in a way that is balanced for me so that I'm not going, overeating and undereating and causing extra stress and strain on the body? Meditation, again, is such a good key. Exercise. If I'm not getting enough exercise, my body is going to not be as strong and not as resilient. So there are many things that you can do that can help create balance on the purely physical level. And this is important to bring up because sometimes it's easy to think that if you just take care of the emotional, just take care of the mental, then that'll be enough. but life as a whole, and physical comes along with it. And so taking care of your physical stresses, and if you're getting too overtaxed physically, just coming back to some kind of routine, some kind of balance, eating on time, going to bed on time, getting up at a regular time, exercising in time. These routines are so helpful for highly sensitive people. My life is very routine. Some people would say, oh my gosh, it's too routine. But for me, it holds that balance and lets me thrive as a highly sensitive person. Okay, so another thing that is important to consider is that highly sensitive people need stress management more than other people. We may not like to admit this, but it's just the simple truth. Everyone needs stress management, but highly sensitive people notice stress much more than people who are not highly sensitive. And I like to say there's no buffer. I don't have a buffer. It's, a lot of people have this great buffer. You can shock them with things. You can throw things at them emotionally, physically, mentally. They can be stressed in different ways or have stressors coming at them in different ways. And it just kind of bounces off them, or they absorb it. They kind of, they move a little bit, but it doesn't shake. With an HSP, we don't have that kind of buffer. And so what happens is that we experience the stress as if amplified. I used to say I have my hearing aids turned all the way up. And then when I go into a situation that is loud or strenuous or emotionally challenging or mentally challenging, I feel it. I feel it right away. And because of that lack of buffer, just naturally, I have to create buffers to allow myself to manage stress. And some of that is just knowing my limits. I can only go so far, and stepping back out of it. So yeah, I remember when I first started doing the work of Byron Katie, which is a great way of buffering, by the way, because you start to have space inside. I sometimes call it wiggle room. So there's this freedom inside, a little space inside, that things outside are coming, but I don't take them inside and amplify them as much. There's a little bit of, okay, that stays out here, this is in here. There's a little separation, like a healthy kind of separation. When I first started doing this process, 15, 16, 17 years ago, it was, if somebody raised their voice, for example, that tone of voice can really get me. I could shut down for like 3 days. I could just really get overwhelmed and be in a funk really for days. Whereas as I've done this process and gotten clearer on what is happening and how to hold myself and how to see it when it happens in real time, I can have that turned around almost instantly. Like, tone of voice will sometimes still get me, but if it does, I can be back on my feet again in minutes, and sometimes hours, but not as long as it used to be. And oftentimes it just doesn't even get me. So we're building a kind of buffer. There's a possibility to build a kind of buffer in you that is independent of the HSP trait, but is just like on a level of understanding, on a level of experience that can really support. So we need stress management. And the good thing is most HSPs are interested in stress management. They're interested in development. And so it's a perfect fit for us. Okay, so last thing I want to bring up is why HSPs have an actual major advantage when it comes to managing stress. This is an advantage that other people don't have. The cool thing is that we catch on to being stressed earlier than most people. And if you catch something earlier, it's just like in medicine, if you catch something in its, a disease in its infancy, then you can change the course of that disease. You can eliminate that much more quickly. It's much harder when it comes a very large, fully developed, advanced stage. And so because we're highly sensitive people, we notice that, we catch on to that earlier, and we can start to do something about it. So my favorite way of doing the work of Byron Katie is to work on daily minor stresses, like little tiny things that just rubbed me the wrong way. Something just, I noticed my emotion dipped like 10% or 5%. And I used that situation as if it was like a real big thing to work on because it got me, it just got me 10%, but it got me. And because I'm doing the work on these small things all the time, it's like prevention. It's like preventive medicine. I am learning how to experience that in a different way right away. I'm correcting it right away. And I am coming back to balance earlier so that the balance doesn't have to go all the way down and become, really dire before I start correcting. So this is, I think, the main major advantage for highly sensitive people. We notice this and we want to be freer. And so we're motivated to do the kind of daily practices that prevent these things from building up. We're motivated in just being able to set up our life so that we can deal with stress as it occurs. Kind of like if think of a tightrope walker, you can't go too far before you fall off the tightrope. But if you're sensitive, you can make tiny little adjustments as you're walking, and you will be correcting the fall that starts to happen as you go along. And this is how you gain a super skill of being able to handle stress. And I think that is the possibility for anyone who's a highly sensitive person, and of course others as well. But there's the possibility of catching stress in its infancy and dealing with it right away, and then just continuing that process so that you're always balancing. Notice a tightrope walker, they don't just say, okay, I figured out balance and now I'm just going to walk normally and forget about it. They're always balancing. And that persistence or that consistency in balancing is what keeps them able to walk on a tightrope, way above the crowd. So there you have it. We have 3 main things that I wanted to talk about today. And we've covered, first of all, the 3 main types of stress: the mental stress, emotional stress, and physical stress. And they're all important. And it's important to pay attention to each of them and to give each of them what they need. What will help mental stress won't necessarily help physical stress, though they're related. What will help physical stress may not be covered when you just deal with mental or emotional stress. So look at each one separately and see what the needs are and see if you can address them. Secondly, we looked at why HSPs need stress management more than other people. And it basically comes down to the fact that we just don't have as much of a buffer as other people. But we can build one through our routines and through our inner space of growing spirituality. And then finally, we talked about why HSPs have a major advantage over others when managing stress. And it all comes down to this one thing: we notice it sooner. And the sooner you notice it and the sooner you act on it, the more you're going to be in the prevention area rather than in the cure area. And everyone knows an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So thanks for being here with me today. It's fun to think about this and to consider how we can manage stress as highly sensitive people. I'm motivated to do it because I'm in this situation myself, and I love to share it with you, and I love to hear your experiences as well. So thanks for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.